sitting down with Kirk, a lot of people are like, why is Kirk in your movie? What did he have to do with East Bay Punk? Well, one of the earliest venues in the East Bay that let punk play was Ruthie's Inn, West Robinson, where there was metal and punk and then thrash. And so that's why he's in it. And also, too, the same white supremacist kind of, long hair gangs in El Sobrante that beat up Metallica also beat up Primus and Green Day in consecutive decades. like in El Sobrante, in that region. It was like, and Hemet was a kid of color, he's part Filipino, and so when I told him this, he was like, the Gravy Boys, and I was like, yeah, and he kind of lit up, it was like he hadn't thought about that in years,
Hello and welcome back. Before we get started, I just want to let my video enjoyers know that today's video hiccups a few times during the first 30 minutes of the episode, but smooths out quickly after that. Thank you for being patient. To my audio-only listeners, you won't really be affected. And as always, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, comment, rate us 5 stars, and all the other things that the algorithm likes. Enjoy. Welcome to the Wait I Know You podcast, Season 2, Episode 25. My name is Nick Rounds, and I will be your host. My next guest is an author, actor, musician, producer, and director. After cutting his teeth in theater, he formed a pre-Tenacious D acoustic duo to impress a girl he had a crush on. That duo became known as Bobby Joe Ebola and the Children MacNuggits, a Gilman Street reject band that later became a Gilman Street headliner, thanks to pure tenacity and relentless touring. After my guest tracked down some rare backyard footage of an early Green Day show, he was commissioned by Green Day to create the 2017 documentary, Turn It Around, The Story of East Bay Punk, a documentary about the creation and legacy of the legendary Berkeley, California punk club, the Gilman Street Project. Corbett Redford, wait, I know you. How are you today?
I'm good, Nick. Your intro has me beaming.
Well, you're a hardworking gentleman, and from doing research of just like the amount of things that you've done, not just in tackling a huge documentary of Turned Around, which took you, it was like 4 or 5 years of your life, right?
5 years.
5 years. Yeah. I mean, good God, like half a decade of your life committed to it. More gray in your beard, more, hours and hours. Yeah.
I don't think I was pretty raven haired before I started that thing. And by the end of it, the graphic designer Michael Houghton, he did a lot of digital rendering for the film. He called me the Punk Whisperer, and I realized not just, it wasn't just about like the prominent folks or the rock stars in the movie. We come from punk is kind of a subculture where there's a lot of I don't want to say damage. There's a lot of folks with a lot of issues. So it was about a lot of patience. It was about a lot of compassion, and it was about a lot of work. And by the end of it, yeah, I got my Elvira streak right here.
the old skunk streak.
Yeah, skunk streak. Yeah.
But before we kick, so we're gonna touch on Turn Around. Hopefully you're not tired of talking about it, but I do absolutely love documentary because I think it's important to touch on it. Just like Murder in the Front Row, it's an important footnote in the history of Bay Area music. So
absolutely. Thank you.
And then I don't know, have you seen the documentary about Ben Fong Torres recently, the guy from Rolling Stone?
It's on Netflix. It's in my queue.
You should watch it. It's really good.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. I view Murder in the Front Row, Turn Around, and now this new Ben Fong Torres documentary of just like the trifecta of like Bay Area important like music documentaries to me. So anyway.
Murder in the Front Row was, I think, happening right toward the end of our production. They started beginning. So, and we worked with Harry O, the Ballad of Harry O, who was one of the photographers for that book. He's in the film, and he lent us a lot of the photos for the metal kind of part of Turn It Around. But anyways, I digress.
It's all good. But before we kick into all the amazing work that you've done, not just for Turned Around, but also for Bobby Joe Ebola, I want to start with your influences and kind of what made you the person that you are today. So what I want to start with is what was your relationship to music, like growing up, and then when did you find your music? And you can interpret that in any way that you want to.
No, that's an interesting question. I mean, my growing up in my house, it was, not to start out on a Debbie Downer note, but there was a lot. It was a lot of tumult. It was an abusive household, and even when there was peace on like, you know, in the other household, my folks were separated. There was still kind of like there wasn't a lot of encouragement. There was a lot of kind of making fun and all of those kinds of things, insults, right? So I think if I brought something home, I think when I was in, you know, it was either my mom and my sister's music, which was like Tony, or like Whitney Houston, or like pop stuff, which, you know, later you can hear that influence in Bobby Joe Ebola and kind of like the thing or the satire that we take on, because it's like a known quantity to me. But my dad was like KFRC, oldies, Rockin' Robin, you know, Beach Boys, things like that, you know. So, but if I were to dare bring music home, you know, that had any kind of strut or anything, you know, I think when I was in 6th grade, a kid in the class for my birthday gave me In Excess Kick, and I was like, oh, this really is awesome. And then I was just kind of laughed out of my house for playing it, or to, you know, for shimmying or whatever. So that at that point, it was when I was kind of like, well, Weird Al, you're my only friend, you know, like if they're gonna make fun of me, then I'm gonna dive into that or lean into that, you know. So I think early on it was that, and it wasn't. I mean, by high school, I had moved away for a couple of years up to Northern California, or, you know, like Nevada City, you know, Grass Valley area, to live with my dad for a few years. I came back, and a few of my friends had gotten into punk, right? And so at first, so it was like a summer trip, and we went out and they played me the Ramones, Blatz, the East Bay punk band, you know, and I thought, my God, this is god awful, you know. I couldn't dig it. And years later, I know every song by both of those bands. I absolutely love them. You know, so at first I couldn't hear the melody. It wasn't, you know, clean pop or oldies, you know. So but then they also played me They Might Be Giants, which was piqued something in my brain. It was a little off. It was a little math. It was a little something. It was a little weird, and I dug it. And slowly but surely, things started developing that way. Also in high school, by my junior year, this is kind of I was a late starter in this. Both of my friends who were in punk were also in theater, and they were like, Corbett, you're kind of a ham, and like, you know, we dare you to audition for this play. And I did, and I got a part. And I remember very vividly being on stage during a rehearsal, and I was supposed to be some sort of, I don't know, person who was like, so it was in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and I was selling Joseph, right? And the teacher was like, you're tired from walking through the desert, and you're kind of delirious, and I was doing this thing, you know, and behind me were two other students inside of a camel costume. I'm pulling them along, and I just remember kind of doing that and snapping out of it and looking around the classroom, and the entire classroom and my teacher, this older man in his 60s, they were red-faced and on the ground laughing. And I was like, man, that's just something, like, I want to do this. And then I realized that kind of my close group of friends were also kind of, they were leaning that way. They were all starting bands, you know, they were you know, making art. And I just thought, I want to do this with my friends forever. I want to make people laugh. I want to sing. I want to perform. I want to do this. It was kind of an escape, I guess. But
how long were you doing theater for? And like, were there any other notable performances that like really stuck with you?
Yeah, well, so I did 3 plays in high school. I did Camelot, where I played Pellinor, who was the old guy in Camelot who's chasing the questing beast. And I always say my first big theater role, I did a couple of chorus parts before that, but they gave me a real sword, a dog, and a kid. So I think that breaks like all of W.C. Field's his initial rules of like, being, show business or whatever. But then I got out of that and I did a summer program, and it was the Crucible. And I think Governor Danforth, who's like the big judge, who's judging all of the girls, and I think I had like 14 monologues in that thing. And simultaneously, we were doing Little Shop of Horrors, where I got cast as Audrey too, and that was
the
voice of the plant. So that really kind of kicked something up in me. And then I was at that point I was about to turn 17. I graduated early, and I was already on my own. I left home, and I tried out for the Maskers Theater in Point Richmond for this, I don't know, is it 18th century, I guess, a play, She Stoops to Conquer, where I played this drunken brat. And they gave me hair extensions and a dialect coach. And so that was a big deal for me too. So I learned a lot from the people at that theater, a lot of, lifetime lifers, I guess you'd say, so yeah, that was kind of it. And then I had a pretty tragic thing happen to me, which really sent me toward punk, which was, I was out on my own. I was, like 2 jobs, trying to make it, no familic support, and there was a local theater production where I was told, hey, we're going to give you this part and Singing in the Rain. And I was like, that was my grandfather's favorite musical. I would love to be in that. And I came down with something at the time that was just a rotten flu. They were calling it the Beijing flu. And now that I think about that, that's pretty racist, like, but at the time that's what they were calling it. And it, I was 17 years old. I couldn't move for like a week or two. And I kept telling the director, I was like, hey, I please, give my part to Larry Yee. He's my understudy. Give it to Larry. And he's like, nope, you're going to come back. You're going to come back. And I the day I got well, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to go to the play, and I'm going to come back. And I let him know that. I got up in the morning. My job at the time was I would do children's parties, and I was the most popular Barney the dinosaur. So, okay, I'll do it. Oh boy, super duper stupendous. I love you. Oh, right. So I was the Barney guy, right? So
and people are either having Vietnam flashbacks of kids parties or
they're tuning out. Yeah.
No, you're good.
So I was my friend Charles, awesome friend of mine, was in my comedy troupe. He was like the only black metalhead in Pinole. He would help me when I would do the parties, because you can't really see inside the things. And I went to his house. I was like, hey, Chuck, wake up. I'll split the money with you. We'll go down and do this. He's like, hey, man, I'm sorry to welch, but I got to go. I'm going to go to the lake with my friend today. And as I was driving back from the party, one of our mutual friends pulled me over on the side of the freeway, which I always wondered why he found me. How do you find somebody on the freeway? He honked me down, and he got out of the car, and he's like, Chuck drowned. And so when I went to go, I called the theater, and I said, hey, Douglas and Winetta, Chuck's parents, they want us to come over to a vigil at their house. And this guy told me, you little rat, I'll blacklist you from every community theater from Portland to Los Angeles. You'll never work in this town again. And, at that time, I think that's when I started wearing all black and listening to a lot more punk music, because I think the ride was over. The innocence was gone, So, and it was more Debbie Downer stories here, you know.
No, you're good.
Yeah.
While you were talking, I looked up. She Suits to Conquer is from 1773.
Oh, okay, there you go.
But yeah, that's what I'm here. I'm always listening, but sometimes I'm looking off to go Google stuff while you're
Oh,
talking.
that's good. That's good.
So you formed Bobby Joe Ebola to play a show in order to impress a girl that you had a crush on. Things of the crush didn't work out, but you found a partner in Dan Abbott, the other half of Bobby Joe Ebola and the Children MacNuggets, your guitarist and bandmate. Can you expand on where Bobby Joe started versus what it evolved into?
Whew, wow. So
just the light questions.
That is a true story, though. You know, I had been writing a few songs with this English guy who was in the States, and so I had a couple tunes lying around, and I knew Dan from school. I wanted him in my comedy troupe, and all the other guys they were a little bit vanilla, and they were like, "Nah, Dan smokes pot. You know, he does drugs. We don't want him." I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, he's great. And Dan like had some sketches he shared with me, and so I got voted down or whatever, and so I always kind of wanted to work with him, you know. And this gal, she was really big into the Gilman sect at that time, you know, like a Rhythm Collision, AFI, Screw 32 shirts, you know. We're talking on the phone, you know, she was digging anybody but me, you know, and I was like, she was lamenting because our mutual friend's band had canceled her birthday party. And I was like, oh, I got a band. And she's like, no, you don't. I was like, yeah, I do. She goes, if you have a band, you can play. It's on Sunday. So I think I literally had four days so I saw Dan. He was hanging out at our house after school. I was like, hey, dude, want to start a band? And he goes, okay. I said, want to play Sunday? He's like, okay. And we just kind of plucked people that lived in that house. There was like 5 or 6 people, you know, stinky dudes or whatever that lived in this house. And in the suburbs, you know, this wasn't like some cool Oakland punk warehouse. This is like the Panola suburbs. And we just made a mess. I think there was somebody playing tuba and trumpet at the same time. And it was just this, but we had fun. And that was kind of the crux of it, was that, you know, however much it wasn't a great, you know, show, if you will, or a great performance or something, it made us laugh, and we had fun together. And Dan and I just started writing more and more. And it wasn't maybe about 6 months later that we recorded a demo, and then recorded our first album, our first EP.
That's awesome. I mentioned in the intro that Bobby Joe Ebola was initially rejected from Gilman Street, mainly because post Green Day there was a lot of gatekeepers at Gilman Street regarding what was allowed or not allowed, or what fit, you know, in the tiny box of punk. After their explosion, you and John Geek of the Fleshies formed, and along with Dan, formed Spam Records, right?
Yep.
And then you formed Geekfest kind of like out of a necessity of creating a platform for yourselves and other bands, including one of my favorites, Gravy Train, which also was cut. You cut a record of Gravy Train from Spam Records as well, which I think is awesome. Because I think there's such another important band from the Bay Area.
I still have a note from Seth. He's like, Corby, thank you for believing in us when no one else did. I just thought they were so good, humorous, and just unafraid of their kind of cartoonish sexuality. They were just, I like to think that band influenced a generation of young people in the Bay Area, like helped a generation of kids in you know, young people in this area kind of just not be afraid of their sexuality or themselves. I'm really proud of having had anything to do with their first record.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's about building community and just giving back, and you're in the same boat as them, of just like, they deserve to be on the stage as much as I do, and you know, every voice in the Bay Area matters. And so
absolutely.
So for Geekfest, like, what were those shows like, and how did that affect the East Bay scene, like kind of before and after?
Well, so we wanted to take an ad out, Maximum Rock and Roll, you know, which at the time, even though it was a different entity than Gilman, there was still, Tim Yo was still kind of, there was crossover there, right? So we asked to take an ad out, and Tim Yo politely was like, sorry, you're not punk, you know? And he basically, the club Gilman said the same thing, and so we were pretty bummed, because at the time, we were all big fans of Green Day. They went to our high school. We knew them, pretty well, but they were, I guess, upperclassmen, if you will. So
Right.
we were like the best of friends or anything, but we were townies together, and so we were like, well, what are we going to do? And we, John from Fleshy's, his dad bought a generator, and we went out to this toxic Superfund site at Point Mulate on the shoreline of Richmond, at the Richmond San Rafael Bridge. Started a telephone line that still is up, called 510 Bad Smut. It's mostly for some shows, underground shows, but also like rallies and activism and things like that. And that was inspired by rave culture, which was like, you want to do underground shows, you don't want to blow up the spot. So, on the flyer, it would say, call 510 Bad Smut for details. So our rule was basically, because Gilman had said we weren't punk, was that, Gilman says no sexism, no racism, no homophobia, no drinking, was that you could call us. We didn't have to read your lyrics. We didn't have to listen to your music. You could play. Since we got cast out, we were like, you can play. But if you show up and you're a bad person or an asshole, or, you're just not going to play again. Right. So this made for it took about, for every one good band like Gravy Train or Dory Tourette and the Skirtheads or Los Rabbis, or, we had to go through 20 or 30 of the worst, bands that you could ever imagine, but in that we found our community. And then Robert Eggplant of Blatz, who also gave Green Day, he was their first shot playing, an East Bay punk show in his backyard in Pinole. He did the same for us. And then he was having a benefit show at Gilman for this touring band called Saki. It was to help them continue on tour. And he got us a slot on the show. And maybe the restrictions were kind of loosening there at that point or something. And we played our first Gilman show. And then slowly but surely, there were more and more spam bands. There were Sharp Knife and the Jocks. And it's at a certain point, right before its inevitable collapse, we were trying to put 40 albums out in 1 year. And this was due in part to like, Lookout wasn't the flagship for Gilman anymore. It used to be that, at Gilman, if you were performing and you were participating, you were likely to be represented on Lookout, right? There wasn't that thing anymore, and so, Lookout was focused more on kind of hip stuff, and so we, Spam kind of became that refuge for, it wasn't really if you were, it wasn't really if you were about if you were good. It was about if you were participating, right? So yeah, and then I'd say by 98, 99, Bobby Joe Ebola and Children MacNuggits, who had been told that we couldn't play Gilman because we weren't punk, we were headlining at Gilman, and so were all the spam bands,
Yeah, it's so it's like a wild thing of just going from not being able to take the stage to being the person that's bringing the whole audience with you to the show.
It was super weird because at that time, that was like Insomniac era for Green Day, I guess. And so they would come back and they would come down to Point Mulate. This was free, all ages, usually 15 bands at a Geekfest on the shoreline. And they would come out, they'd crack their beer open, they would be coming home. And they had felt alienated kind of from the whole Gilman thing, but they kind of felt, because we were like, Cocoa County, Contra Costa County townies, they felt home there. And they were telling us, like, I remember Mike very vividly going, you guys are touring, you're playing, you guys are the new punk. And we're like, what are you talking? We're not punk. Gilman told us we're not punk, And, I always kind of joke, it's like, you don't know you're redefining history, until after you redefine it, It's like we didn't realize what was going on when we were doing it, but we wound up becoming the next kind of little thing at Gilman there.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
So also the thing that, like, in doing my research about you and about Bobby Joe Ebola, I am thoroughly impressed by the output of your band that you've done in terms of just like music videos, pressings, tours, and all that. Just like an incredible amount of work. And then you transferring over to do the documentary and realizing how much work that was. I'm just like, how is Corbett alive? How does he ever sleep?
Thank you for that. At least somebody in the world sees it. No, I
Well,
don't.
me and your wife, not to make it weird.
Yeah,
I guess.
that's it. Two people. Yeah, exactly. No, she does. I would not have been able to do that movie had I not had her telling me, talking me off the ledge, like, or even how much we did with the band. I think by 2000, when we broke up, or we said we went on hiatus during the Bush administration, was our joke. I think a lot of kind of demons from my childhood, the abuse and stuff that was catching up to me. We were actually, a lot of people would say we didn't know we were being accepted and we didn't know how to accept that. We had been so used to not being a part of things, and then we were selling out Gilman, and it was like, I didn't really know how to process that. So it wasn't some knockdown, drag out. Actually, there was just a big, long hug and crying. And it was like we were about to go on this big tour, and we were going to play with like TSOL at one point on the East Coast. And it just all dissolved. But over I think 2 weeks later, the English guy, that I originally wrote songs with, his wife had died, and she had 2 kids who were special needs, and they needed to have a benefit. So we got back together, and then Gilman was like, "Oh, hey, we saw you got back together. We need a new sound system." And it was like, oh God. So we were like, everyone's like, "You're not really broke up." It's like, well, shit. I mean, like I don't know what to tell you. Like, sorry, like doing these benefits, And but then, like, over the years, like Steve the List would have a birthday, or like about once a year something special would happen and we would play, right? And then we were also like roommates during that time, and I got married, and I was working at Berkeley Lab for the University of Berkeley, where I work now, actually. But back then, and the job I had, they put me on night shift, and it was really affecting my brain and stuff. And my wife was like, Melissa, she was like, "Hey, you and Dan, you seem to like, hang out a lot. Everything's like really good. And like, why don't you do the band again?" I was like, well, because when we do the band, we don't like just, do the band, And she's like, "It doesn't matter. Like, you should go full bore, like if you make a nominal amount of money, that's fine. We're doing good, like just do it." And I mean, then it was just, I think we recorded doing part 2 a past guest of yours, Craighams. I think from 2009 to 2013, we might have recorded 60 songs with him. And yeah, we played about 400 or 500 shows in that time. And we hopped over the pond for the first time. We went to England. We did 10 or so music videos, all on. We had no label, we had labels, but they oftentimes there would be something, the labels just really wouldn't do any work. They wouldn't, and they would pay for part of things or something. And so we tried that for a bit, and then we were just like, okay, we're going to do it all ourselves. And then there was this tour. We had been out for 30 days, and our label, we came back and they were like, "Hey, we want you guys to go out again. There's this new band on the label." And that label didn't, we were like, okay, well, we will, but usually we do all of our press too. And the label didn't, what are you saying? They didn't put up press releases to the weeklies and stuff. So that tour kind of fell flat. We wound up in Seattle, and our old townie friends, the Mystic Knights of the Cobra, showed up, and they're like 15 people deep, and like the drummer and the bassist we shared with them. And it was just this catastrophic melee, and we were about to land back home at our first headlining Great American Music Hall show at San Francisco.
Oh wow!
And it was just a mess. It was like that show in Seattle we got paid really well. It was like sold out. It was amazing, but there was this cataclysm, and it wasn't between Dan and I, who are like, the main members in the. It was rotten, and I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I hit a wall. We were going so long with so little support and doing so much, and which is funny because now, I meter it like a hobby, if you will, and I'm having more fun and even some of the most unheard of things I could never imagine happening, like being included in the new Love Songs video that's coming out with Weird Al Yankovic, being in the fifth grade and him being my only friend, and now this is happening, and but yeah, we came back and we played that show. It was a great show, and we just I remember putting out an Instagram post basically saying, I thought it was over, and it was just it, and it was done, and something, and this mysterious Instagram account was like something about on to the next horizon or something. Turns out I didn't know that the person had been following me for a while, and I didn't know who they were, and I figured out it was Billy Joe from Green Day. And I'd say a couple weeks later, I got a call, and that's how Turn It Around happened. But so the dust settled, and it kind of went from that to that, and so I don't know. I feel like I'm running all over the map here.
No, you're good. You're running through questions for me without actually me having to ask anything. So I'm just keep doing your thing.
Okay.
But yeah, so as you touched on earlier, that Billy Joe Armstrong was an upperclassman, and he reached out to you initially to go track down some really rare Green Day footage that you happen to know how to get a hold of. And after delivering the goods, you were asked to make Turn It Around, which was also your directorial debut, which is kind of wild to think about, that you said yes to, I'm going to do the documentary, and holy shit, now I have to go do the documentary.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
So in making your full-length album, F, which you did 15 music videos for, obviously it wasn't your first rodeo in terms of producing motion pictures and a ton of video. What are some of all the things that you had to teach yourself and basically scramble to find someone to do for you if you couldn't do it yourself once you took that project on? Like, basically, what was going through your head, and like, what did you have to teach yourself once you said yes to, I'm going to do Turn It Around?
Oh, that's a good question. I look at it as the whole thing is about knowledge and organization. I mean, I think, Billy called me and he was like, hey, we're looking for this video from 1990. It's in a backyard, and like Green Day is playing. It's like, it was like, it was probably one of his favorite times back then, and you look in the crowd, it's like, the guys from Neurosis and NoFX, and it's like, and all the East Bay Cats, all those folks, and I knew who had it, and the guy was a Bobby Joe Ebola fan. And I think Billy had asked a mutual friend of ours, Jesse from Blatz, and Jesse was like, I know the guy that has it, and like, you should ask Corbett, because like, and so I was like, I told Billy, I was like, yeah, he has it. And I knew that this guy was like one of this guy, Mark, he was kind of a bellyacher, he's like, yeah, green duh, like a lot of the people in the scene just kind of giving them shit or whatever. And I went up to him and I was like, hey, that tape, you have, and he said, you know what, I'm going to give it to you, but I hope that something good comes out of it, and I knew Craigham's and Daniel Haig, and who wound up being one of the archivists for the film. And I was like, I know of a bunch of other videos too. And I put it all on a hard drive and I brought it to the studio, and Billy looked at it the next day. He called me and he's like, this is amazing. Like, this is our early history. Thank you. Yeah, we're thinking about doing a documentary about our early years and the other bands involved and stuff. Do you know anybody who could do it? And I actually said, yeah, me. And so I kind of volunteered myself, right? And he goes, I think you're right. I'm going to talk to Mike, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. The reason you had asked, like, what did I learn? I think when Billy told Mike this, they were both aware of the undertaking. that when you're talking about all these different bands and all these different stories, I mean, which wound up 150 interviews for like 500 hours of interview footage, 50,000 photos and flyers over the course of 5 years. I had booked a 12, or I don't know, it was like a 12-date tour for the Frustrators, which was Mike Dirnt from Green Day's side band. And he's like, I want 7 bands on this one and this burlesque troupe and let's get. And so I organized all that. And he goes, Bobby Joe Ebola can MC every show, you know? And so it was like, I didn't have very much fun on that tour because I was, doing the work and performing and stuff. But
right.
I think he had an idea that I could handle something like that. And then on Instagram around that time, right before the band went on hiatus again, I had been doing the Bobby Joe Ebola songbook, which was, I think, a couple hundred pages of like 40 artists illustrating our songs, So I have this penchant for keeping it all in my line of sight. I don't really. That's why I'm an executive administrative assistant, at Berkeley Lab with like scientists and philanthropists and all of this stuff. I can kind of keep it all in my purview, I guess they say, So I really, plus I cared about the history. And I think Billy was like, I think Corbett can do this because like he's a known quotient in the scene. He's not an outsider, I mean, what did I learn? I learned that there's no one way to do something. In fact, there was a few starts where we thought, this is how we're going to build it. This is how we're going to put it together. And it wound up being nothing like that. Pouring through 500 hours of interview footage, we had to develop our own system of keywords and to like, okay, well, here we are. Here's the theme of this moment, right? Or here's the theme of this scene. Okay, well, who haven't we seen in a while? This is kind of a dude party here. Let's look for female voices or I think there's an ice cream truck outside. Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, what I think is great about the documentary is not only is it not like a cis het white dude party that you make sure that there's a lot of important footnotes, but Spit Boy, which was an all female band, got as much airtime as Green Day and Jawbreaker and Op Ivy. Like you in the documentary, you touched on so many other amazing bands during that time. So
thank you. I think Billy Joe only had a few ground rules. Other than that, people were like, well, Green Day must have told you how to make it, how they wanted to be seen, and not at all. I mean, that was one of the coolest things about it was like, Mike and Billy, they're from the same, refinery towns that I'm from, so there was kind of a neat thing to go in there and just, the first band I was gonzo about was Green Day, so it was a big deal for me, but he was like, all voices heard, don't mystify nostalgia. Let's not build this to where any kid watching it will think they missed the boat. They can never make something so cool. And there was one other rule. I can't.
Don't focus on the acrimony and the backbiting.
Yeah, that you did your research. Yeah, like we can get lost in that. And I think a few people, on the internet were like, well, they didn't talk about this, they didn't talk about that. And usually, actually, that was for continuity reasons. That was like, well, we could go back and we could talk about that. But at this point, we talked briefly about that ages ago in this like practically 3-hour documentary, and we're on a whole new train. So yeah, I think we talked about the acrimony a bit, but the East Bay can get lost in that. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I believe it. I mean, you were sitting there interviewing people, and I'm sure you got a bunch of hot takes. I'm not here to unpack that.
Let me tell you. Yeah. 100%. Like there was stuff that like you're like, ooh, I hope that footage never gets out because that person said that thing, and that would be like not good. Yeah, so you're right. There were some hot takes. For sure.
I believe it. But to focus on the positive, so Iggy Pop narrates the documentary, which is an incredible get. But you also had conversations with both local and international legends such as Larry Livermore, Robert Eggplant, Kirk Hammett, and Kathleen Hanna. And I'm curious, during those interviews, like which ones were like the most surreal and intense to be a part of?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I think one of the man. I mean, God, I when you say those names, I'm like thinking each person. I would talk about. I was pretty good friends with Eggplant, and I knew Larry briefly. And he's such a genius and such a good writer. That was definitely a big deal. I think sitting down with Kirk, a lot of people are like, why is Kirk in your movie? What did he have to do with East Bay Punk? Well, one of the earliest venues in the East Bay that let punk play was Ruthie's Inn, West Robinson, where there was metal and punk and then thrash. And so that's why he's in it. And also too, one of the most like the cultural anthropological kind of reasons I wanted him in it was because the same white supremacist kind of long hair gangs in El Sobrante that beat up Metallica also beat up Primus and Green Day in consecutive decades. like in El Sobrante in that region. It was like, and Hammett was a kid of color, he's part Filipino, and so when I told him this, he was like, the Gravy Boys, and I was like, yeah, and he kind of lit up, it was like he hadn't thought about that in years, and this region, you're 10 minutes from the center of knowledge in Berkeley, right? That is Berkeley. And a lot of people don't realize, you go 10 minutes outside of San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, you're in a place that's not unlike Kansas, and that place also, made for a lot of original music because there wasn't a lot of culture. So, bands like Green Day, Metallica, Primus all came from here, so that was a kick. And, I remember sitting in my living room and getting this random text, and we had been trying to get Kirk for a while. And it was like, hey, let's do my interview in Ed's bar. I'm like, who is this person? Ed's bar is this bar in El Sobrante outside of Sherwood Forest. And I was like, I told my wife, I was like, I think Kirk Hammett is texting me. That was a surreal moment. One of the coolest. Well, I mean, Iggy was amazing, and that whole experience is amazing. But I think Kathleen was just probably the most rad. She was so cool. She's so kind, so smart, and like the interview was great. And then afterwards, we were renting our friend's studio, the folks in Shell Shag. They had a production studio out in New York, and she was like, "Hey, I got to go to practice, to band practice. Can you guys give me a ride to band practice?" And we were heading out to John F. Kennedy Airport, and we were late. And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And my crew was like, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm like, "Dude, like,
you don't say no to Kathleen Hanna."
Are you kidding me? Like, no, like I'm not gonna say no. Like, are you kidding me? Like, and we got to talk more, and she came to our premiere in Los Angeles, and I was running around from like theater to theater. Like, I was on K-Rock that morning, and it sold out in like 4 or 5 theaters that night when it was only one showing at the beginning of the night. And I think they kept adding them through the day, actually. But she came out, and I was running to some other theater, and she goes, "Hey, Corbett." I was like, "What?" She goes, "Good job." And I was like, "Oh man!" Like that was definitely stands out for me. But Iggy was probably the most surreal. That was the most surreal. I don't even understand how that whole thing happened. I mean, I know why it happened, but like,
right.
It was also just, yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, Iggy Pop is like the guy that Henry Rollins pinches himself over in terms of like, I get to talk to Iggy Pop, and I'm sure Billy Joe probably feels the same way. Not to project, but it's funny like how him and Bowie and other people in that era, or people anybody from MC5 are like, oh my god, like those are the people that like make you nerd out a little bit.
Completely. When we were verging on a 5-hour cut, and I was telling Billy, I was like, man, we either make this a series or we get a narrator to condense themes. And he's like, well, let's think about it. Okay, let's think about a narrator. And everyone's like, well, what about somebody from in the scene? It's like, well, if you have Tim Armstrong do it, then everyone's going to be like, well, why didn't Billy Joe do it? If you have this person do it, then why, you can't have a person from inside the scene. So I was like, well, what about Tom Waits? And because he was local, and Billy's like, that's a good idea, and then I think maybe from the Jarmusch connection or something, his brain went, and then he called me. He's like, well, what about Iggy? He's like, we did, 3 songs on his Skull Ring album a while back, and maybe, he would return the favor. And before I knew it, I was on the phone talking with Iggy Pop, and he was like, come down to my house. And it was just intense. He gave us 10 hours that day, I think, in his house, the day after his birthday, I believe. So, he was a little bit maybe wine hungover or something, like I don't know, he's a beautiful person, and he was so kind to give us what he gave us.
That's awesome. One thing you touched on earlier, which I think is actually really interesting to talk about, is just how Oakland and Berkeley and San Francisco seem to kind of be like the hub that people organize at. But then there's so many other bands and people that came from the suburbs or other places around the Bay Area, like, famously Cliff Burton from Castro Valley, and the Love Songs Kids from Pleasanton. It's always funny, like how people grow up outside the Bay Area, or still part of it, but not necessarily in Oakland or in San Francisco or in Berkeley, but then find their community and the people there, and then it becomes their central hub. But that's always been an interesting thing about the Bay Area, is that those hubs seem to like attract kids, and kind of that's the way that those bands kind of naturally evolve and grow from.
It's interesting because when I met the Love Songs guys, it was Craig was in the band Your Mother, and when we first saw them, they dropped at a Geekfest. That was one of the bands. They had just got back from a European tour, and they were outside. It was a generator. We didn't know these guys, and they were so tight because they just got home from tour, and they played like this like sonic metal punk version of Fun Zone by Weird Al Yankovic, the instrumental. And we were just freaking out, geeking out. Like, what is this? Who are these people? We just fell in instant love, And it's interesting what you're saying, because I'm thinking about it. There was Alex Cole, who's comedian, but he was like the zine guy in the crew, and then Joe Demery, who was in Ringworm, and he's a painter, and, Mikey Porter, who went on to play in the Toy Dolls, and now he's in Shiza Minnelli, the best named punk band in the world.
Nice.
So they were just this thing, and I think just like we were, we were in the the suburbs of Pinole, where they were like thinking Pleasanton, right? So you have this thing, and you don't let not being in a cultural hub inhibit you, but you can only kind of do so much there, right? And so you hone it, and you're not really influenced by too much outside. The internet was kind of just bubbling, so you're really kind of going on, what you and your friends are inspiring you, right? And then you bring your weird semi-unique thing to like the larger hub, right? You just like, that's what Gilman was really, right? It was like suddenly when Gilman opened, it was like from all these places, kids were just flocking from all these little towns, and then it became, that cultural kind of conduit, right?
Yeah, that was the interesting thing in the documentary. Like, Tim Armstrong was in New York at the time, and he saw an ad for 1984 Gilman. And was like, wait, what the hell? I'm going back home, which I thought was hilarious.
He was bummed out because Basic Radio, they were playing, occasionally at Ruthie's, and they were playing at like Barrington Hall, but they were a bit zany, if I'm not mistaken. They had like a lot of members. There was a lot of they would jump genres, not unlike Rancid does now,
Right.
But they just kind of really didn't feel at home. And if you look one of the coolest things, is because like Rats is like they're a pretty serious band, But if you look in those pictures, not just of like the old Murray Bowles pictures at Gilman, of early Gilman, 86, 87, or 87, 88, not only do you see every member of Op Ivy or Rancid like on stage in those pictures, you see them in the audience as like gleeful kids, covered in confetti and shredded paper, and like, there's just so much joy and creativity going on at that point. And it really isn't about like that thing that Billy said when we started making the movie. It isn't about mystifying something, It's like you can totally do it. It's not easy, but if you get together with your friends and you keep pushing and you keep creating and you keep pardon me, and you keep your sense of wonder, you can make something like that happen for yourself. You can and then you'll inspire others to do that. It's you got to keep it going. Punk is, people say, well, there's no punk anymore. Punk is dead and all this stuff. And I think I heard Billy say, maybe it was like in a Rolling Stone interview recently, maybe punk now is like a SoundCloud rapper and you just don't get it, it's not about it being for youth culture, but I think it's about punk is an energy, in my opinion.
Yeah, to me, punk has always been an ethos and a lifestyle of, DIY obviously being a huge tenet of it. And then also something that you say frequently is, not asking for permission, begging for forgiveness, in terms of just like, if you're going to ask who's going to do it, the answer is you. And I think that's like a tenet of what East Bay DIY culture is just like, don't, to quote Gorilla Biscuits, start today.
Yeah, we our Spam Records, I think toward the end of it, we had a fictional revolutionary commandant named Chuque J. Pinedo, and we said his motto for Spam Records was thought plus action equals progress, or simply do shit. Do it. Just do it. Like, if it's in your heart, it's in your head, make it in your hands, make it out here. There's no gatekeepers. There's no rules, it's like, except be kind. That's the thing. That's another thing about a lot of us kids who came from the suburbs. We didn't have parents who were like, professors and stuff. So it was like, that's what I would encourage a lot in the world. I think it's really great that there's these motions toward people being called out for their shit on their shit. Like if you're spewing hate and you're being ableist or sexist or racist, you need to be called out on it. But you don't need to be cast out like you're like forever going to be that kind of evil, person. There has to be a learning curve, and we were lucky enough to have gentle enough people, I believe, early on who were like, hey, we know you come from the sticks, but like, we don't really do that here. Maybe you should think about why you might be doing that, and like, so I don't know. We say it in our at the beginning, in the foreword of our songbook. You can't learn from your history if you bury your past. You can't learn from your mistakes if you bury your past. Yeah. So it's yeah.
That makes sense. So I saw the premiere here in Seattle in 2017. I loved it a lot, and before this conversation, I watched it again. And one thing that like really stuck with me, that again, talking about pre-internet
yeah.
conversations that kind of like were literally happening organically, and it's always funny like how even pre-internet, like these conversations were just bubbling all around the Bay Area. But the most interesting part of the documentary is like the latter half, where it focused on how the club famously made a no major label band's role. And the punk scene has always kind of had heated conversations about what selling out is. And obviously Green Day is the biggest band that's been affected by that, and kind of more or less the reason why Gilman has that role. So from sitting face to face with people that were made or affected by those decisions, what's your personal take on it? Especially after having to sit through all the different perspectives of those people.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. It's I think Brett Gurewitz said, he answered the question, I believe, in the Spotify documentary about Green Day. Are Green Day punk? Well, yes, they're the biggest band in the genre. I don't know. There's like the anarcho-syndicalist purists of what's left of maximum rock and roll, who at times when as the popularity of punk ebbs and flows, it's like, we're going to make our art black and white and our music unlistenable simply because what we do is secret, And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is that, the way I look at it, a lot, we would be called out sometimes for our ambition. And I was talking to my bandmate Dan, from Bobby Joe Ebola the other day, and we were like, really, what was keeping us going was the excitement about creating, that kind of spark that you get from like sharing an idea with a creative peer, and then they bounce back, and then you get really excited about it, and then you want to share it with other people. That's really what kept us going. And then we realized, oh wow, yeah, we Dan did go to college eventually on loans and everything, but at that time, we were putting so much work into it. It was kind of like, this is what we're doing. We didn't have well-to-do parents, or it was really just what we were doing. So it was like, well, if this is a small business and we're working class kids, I remember coming back to town and bands that were back here that were our friends were like, buying suits and expensive equipment from Guitar Center and only playing like one show every 6 months. And they're like, oh, so you guys like really got signed to a label? Wait, I saw you guys played like a house show in like St. Petersburg, Florida. Like, and it's like, yeah, we played a house show with like 100 sweaty kids who like bought all of our shit. And like, yeah, we're not going to just sit around waiting to find our audience. We're not going to, or we're going to go out and get inspired and make new friends. And like, I mean, that's the best thing that I could ever say that came out of being in a band was touring, and just the people that I met and that I still hold dear to this day. As far as whether or not, like selling out is good, it's like, I've learned now, as I'm a father and a husband, and, I'm killed by desk, to reference another podcast, right? Like,
which Craig has also been on. Yes,
he's been on as well, right? But I realized that like there is an aspect of like chasing that carrot. You have to remember why you're doing it. And I think as I kind of launch back into doing things again, I'm kind of like, wow, like I'm getting that fun feeling again, and I'm able to create with my peers, but I don't have to like break my neck and stress out about it. And it just so happens that I have like a cult following, and and my band does, and like we did this film, and so other eyes might, if we make something else, like, I get a lot of questions from like younger creatives who are like, well, how did you do this, and how did you do that, and how did you meet this person? And I'm like, if you stick around long enough, and you're like, you don't even have to be good. You can just be like halfway decent at what you do. You're going to wind up having stories. I mean, like Bobby Joe Ebola one time opened the door and closed the door, and suddenly this person standing in front of us turns around and it's Henry Kissinger. Okay. Like, the world is big and scary, but you got to go out and you got to do something. And like, and if it, I don't think it's a bad thing to try to make a living off of what you love doing. And those Green Day kids, man, I'll tell you what, I think what was Mike was frying fish, Billy was doing a diaper service, Trey was next in line to be Bigfoot and Willits, like pardon me, yeah, like it's they had no backup plan. That was what they were supposed to be doing, So I don't know. I do see a lot of people dreaming the dreamer's dream and chasing the carrot, and they're doing it for all the wrong reasons. And they're just going to have to figure it out themselves, But to all those people who would question why I was doing what I was doing, I wouldn't take any of it back. So I hope that answers the question.
No, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you, because like the explosion of Green Day, because like I didn't know about Green Day until because I was 11 when Dookie came out, I think, and my first exposure to Green Day was Basket Case, watching that on MTV. My episode 16, Emily Whitehurst, similar story where she wasn't part of the Gilman scene, but then she heard Basket Case for the first time, and it changed her life. In a lot of ways, that's what brought me to punk rock as well, was really Green Day. So to me, the legacy of Green Day, in addition to just being wait, these guys are from the Bay Area, this is our band, and of the generation, and not just like, oh, it's Santana or Huey Lewis or, and no shade to those people, because
I love Huey Lewis.
Yes, I do. My mom used to be I don't want to say groupie, but she was a Santana regular. I've seen Santana 25 times because of her, because she's a huge Santana fan. But the point is that like when there's a band that's from your hometown and it's like your band, then there's so much hometown pride, and there's a lot of hometown pride for Green Day, even with all the weird politics and stuff like that. So
it really for us in Pinole, it's like, again, I was underclassmen. I wasn't like best friends with them, but I knew them. Mike had helped me when a bully had thrown my backpack under a bleacher at high school, and then suddenly they're rocketing out, and you're like, whoa, they can get out of this. So you can get out of this town. Holy shit. And then like they play Woodstock. And I remember for some reason we got patched in cable that day, and we were watching it, and we could see the melee. And I remember the whole stream cutting out right as Mike got tackled and they knocked his teeth out. And I remember we were all just in the house, like we cared, like it was like a big deal, It was like there is a sense of pride, there's a sense of excitement. It's such a pure, wonderful thing, when you realize that life. It's like when I met Robin Williams when I was a kid. I was going through a bunch of stuff, and I was sitting at a Broadway show in San Francisco, and my girlfriend was like, waxing poetic, and she was like, during intermission, if you could meet anyone, living or dead, who would you meet? I would want to meet Audrey Hepburn and Raul Julia. And I said Roger Clemens, who was a Red Sox pitcher at the time, and Robin Williams. And I said, I'm going to go get she goes, oh, that's pretty good. And I got up to go get what do you call this? The program. In the 8th row aisle seat was Robin Williams. And my first impression of him was like, wow, like he's kind of wispy. He's like really he almost looks brittle. He's not like this big thing on the big screen. He's not like the Titan Popeye arms. So those were prosthetic. Okay, he's like a real human, right? And that's the same thing that Green Day did, I think, for a lot of us, where we were like, whoa, it's like the universal feeling of there being a gate that's being kept, right? It kind of lifts, and you feel like it's attainable, and you feel like it's possible, like, I don't know. It's I think ambition is underrated.
So to round out the conversation, your documentary is coming up on a 5-year anniversary. Congratulations. With Time to Breathe, how do you feel about the project now that you've survived it and its release and the dust is settled? Other than, again, more gray in your beard and your son being born, what does that time and documentary mean to you personally now?
I immediately think that if I would have made the movie an hour and a half, it would have done better commercially, like which I don't really care about, but I always, when everyone's like, anybody says to me, oh, I just watched your movie, and I'm like, did you take a break? Did you, it's almost 3 hours long, and it's some very esoteric subject, honestly, we knew we had to make the movie that way. We cut and we cut and we cut. I mean, there's a great deleted scene on the DVD of there was this record store run by this woman named Non Nichols out in El Sobrani. And there's no record stores in El Sobrani, but she sold cool records like REM and punk and stuff. And there were Jason Bebout from Sam I Am and Isocracy says that it turns out that the Night Stalker, his girlfriend, lived next to the record store. And so where all the punks would hang out and skate and stuff, the Night Stalker was hanging out there. Like,
holy shit.
Yeah. And so like, there was so much awesome stuff that we had to cut out. So like, what are we at? 340 something, I believe, for the film, I do think about its duration, but I get so many people telling me that they love it and that they love it for what it is. I think the main thing that we wanted to show was that, sure, there's all these like successful and inspiring faces in this thing, but there's also too the people who did the shit work, the people who ran the door, the people who, mopped the floors, some of them who also happen to be like Tim Armstrong, who would like, sweep the floor after Op Ivy shows, I look back on it fondly. At the time, it was all consuming, and it was a whole ball of stress because, after we had gotten Picture Lock, I spent a good year doing like the legal stuff for it. I believe it was maybe even exactly 100 clips of music that I needed to get cleared, and some of these bands, there wasn't anybody to sign for it. You had to, a lot of punk bands, they just kind of flame out, and like either folks are gone or they just don't care, So it was a lot of work, and I think looking back on it now, I'm really proud of what we did, and I'm proud of Green Day for taking the risk, for dropping the coin to make something so esoteric. We could have. I always tell people, I was like, we could have made a movie that was like, okay, San Francisco is the birth of punk in the Bay Area. Hardcore emerges, it gets violent. The need for Gilman arises. Gilman arises. Green Day Op Ivy gets big. Op Ivy dies. Green Day comes up. They get big. The end. It could have just been like that, But we wanted to show homocore, and I thought it was very important to show Miranda July, who won like the Palme d'Or or something. Like, she did her first play at Gilman. Like, Michael Franti in the Beatniks. I thought, he would open for Op Ivy and Fugazi at Gilman. It was like, and then he tells his awesome U2 story in the film. He's like, yeah, we were this crappy Gilman band, and then we got plucked by U2 to go on this, tour of the United States. And I think, what does he call?
He calls the Edge Ed.
Ed, yeah, he with all the whole tour he was calling the Edge Ed. Yeah, like, I'm proud. Long story short, I'm proud of it.
So what's next for you creatively? Like, where are you at today? Like, music, anything else? Like, are you just happy doing your thing?
My kid is laps around me creatively. My kid is like, he's writing scripts, he's writing comics, he's singing along to every song in the car, and he's just and I part of me is like, go to college, be a doctor, but I'm like, nah, you know what? I'm not. There's no way I'm going to squash that in him. I also don't want him, to be like a baseball dad and be like, this is how you hold the mic, like I'm not gonna. But I just want to encourage him in anything he does. So I would say, put my head into my day job, and suddenly out of the blue, Craigums from the Love Songs says, "Hey, Corbett, Dan, Bobby Joe Ebola, we're doing this project. We're trying to get Weird Al." They're like, and I went and got Kirk Hammett for it, and like Nardwar's in it, and it's like this amazing epic cartoon that's coming out. It's a Love Songs video, but Bobby Joe Ebola gets to be a part of it, and Weird Al's in it. It's just amazing. That's coming out, and I'm writing a book of short stories, and there's some music percolating. There's some things happening where it feels really good. I think after the dust of just so much hard work and ambition and just kind of running on empty for so long, I think for a lot of times the idea of for a lot of people who are like really kind of creatively ambitious and who are trying to make a living off of what they love doing, to like resign themselves to their creativity being a hobby, which is actually the good part of the whole Maximum thing, where it's like, this band could be your life doesn't mean anything but like an interpersonal thing. It's like a lot of those Maximum bands, they keep their day jobs, they're not trying to chase the carrot, and there's something that can be learned from that too, I think. But I'm at a point where I'm really excited about writing music, and I'm really excited about sharing things creatively again, because yeah, I think the film kind of took it out of me for a little while. Like I needed a big rest, and I was a new dad coming out of it. And now I'm finally, as of like the last 4 or 5 months, going, okay, like I think I can do this without breaking my brain and my body, and do it for the reasons that I love doing it. And it also just so happens that, you know, a few people will listen to it, and that's exciting, you know? So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Awesome. So for context, the short is called That Sucks,
Yeah.
from the Love Songs, which is coming up pretty soon. Definitely follow Love Songs on socials. Speaking of which, Corbett, before we take off, is there anything else that you'd like to plug before we leave? Social media sites, cool things happening in your life?
Yeah, you can find out more about the movie at eastbaypunk.com. It's East Bay Punk on Instagram as well. You can check me out at Corbett Redford on Instagram. That's where I'm most kind of busy, I guess. Mostly pictures of my cat and kid, and then you can check out Bobby Joe Ebola at bobbyjoeebola.com, and Bobby Joe Ebola on Instagram, Twitter, and the old face space.
And if people want to donate to Gilman, the website is?
They can go to it was savegilman.org, but 924gilman.org.
Okay. Yeah. I couldn't remember which one it was, so that's why I was asking you specifically, because are you still part of the board or the part of the...
No, I was on the board for a while, kind of concurrently with the movie, and we raised $150,000. I figured it was like, if we're going to, kind of be so intertwined about the history, we might as well use what we're doing to try to, like, because the club was really struggling at that time. And I think within the course of like 3 or 4 years, we raised $150,000 that wound up keeping the club alive for a long time, even going into COVID. So yeah, they could use your help though. 924gilman.org. You can find hit the donate button.
Awesome. Corbett, thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Nick, thank you. It was excellent.
Everybody else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.